Agapiti Kadimari Karispera Potorent Montkegalos at this Ena Coma.NET API review. Today we're resuming the vector data uh, extensions library, and we'll see how far we get. Take it away, Shai.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for your continuing attention to this big API. So first, a very quick update just to pick up where we left off on Tuesday. We were discussing the Upsert APIs and whether they should be returning the keys or whether they should be just injecting the keys into the records. Wesley and I had a conversation today, and we both think that we should actually just change this to inject rather than return the keys. A couple notes on that. First, obviously, it's much more usable if you say upsert this record, and then once that's done, you've awaited it and it's done. The key is just populated in that type rather than getting it via the return type, and then you have two different things which you have to, correlate in the case of a list. So we've got two lists with same index and so on. It's not a very usable experience, and obviously it would be better if we just injected. EF Core also does this, so anybody doing data with .NET via EF Core is already, this would not be surprising to them. That's just the expected behavior, I would suspect, and it would be opt-in no matter what. So by default, we're not going to be doing database side generation anyway. So that's also like, it's not like this would be a surprising thing. You've opted into it by telling us you want auto-generated keys. And the last argument here that I kind of thought about is that the return value here is only relevant for database generated key scenarios. In others, if you're not using database generated keys, these return types are useless. And in fact, maybe even a bit confusing. You might even be targeting a database that doesn't even support it. And at that point, we've just got this return value there, and it's just doing nothing for you. So we kind of just think that it's better to just mutate the record here and inject the key into it. Does that correspond with people's opinion?
I mean, I would expect it to just fail. But
in what scenario? Sorry.
I guess you care about database set IDs, and therefore I guess you need to get it back. But saying that you're going to mutate the record requires, or either you're saying record can't be a struct, which maybe that's already true, or that you're going to change it to pass by ref. You muted when you coughed, I think.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah. Yeah, it's true. When we discussed earlier, we forgot the detail about the struct. So we do currently allow you, a struct, and at that point there's a problem indeed. So we could also restrict this to be a class only. I'm not sure there's a big loss there in general if the record type is by reference only. On the other hand, maybe it's a bit of a shame to do that just because of the database generated key kind of thing. So I'm kind of hesitating now.
So, I mean, you mentioned not everything even has upsert and all of that. If you did make T-record class only, would it only be for the upsert method, or would that then be a...
No, it would be because that's a generic type on the whole interface here, or what's going to become a base class. Basically, the collection is generic over its type, so that would mean we restrict the whole MEV deep experience.
I mean, you could restrict only
like structs. Sorry.
If you're talking about functionality limitation, you could simply throw out of upsert if T-record is a struct and the ID is null.
Then
you could
we gotta
not block the type, but block the scenario.
I kind of like that. Yeah,
I prefer that as well. As much as I dislike runtime errors that could be compile errors, I think in this case it's worth it.
Okay. Does that sound good? Yeah, I see Wesley's thumbing up, so I guess that sounds good. Yeah, thanks for reminding. The problem with structs here slipped my mind a little bit. So that's a good point there.
Okay. So that's both upserts become task avoid, aka
task avoid.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yep. I've made a note. Okay, so we have some issues to discuss around get, but I'd like to jump over to searching first and loop back to this because the searching, there's a bit of meat to discuss there. So we'll get back to get here. We basically covered all of iVector store and we've covered all of collection except for get. So we're jumping away and we'll be back in a bit. So you'll notice that there's no APIs for for searching here, which is the main thing that you want to do with collections. This is because if you look at the if you look at this, you will see that we extend an iVector search interface. There's also this legacy thing, the iVectorized search. You can disregard it; that's going away. So iVector search is basically an interface. I'd love to discuss naming on it in a bit, but the idea here is that the search methods are on this interface. And the reason you see I have search and search embedding and the other one extends it. The reason for this is I mentioned early, on Tuesday, that vector databases tend to have two use cases. One is the consuming side where you search, and the other one is the data maintenance side where you're importing, upserting, deleting, and all that kind of stuff. And these tend to be disjoint with the vector databases, unlike normal databases where the same application will be querying and inserting and deleting and all that in a single transaction and so on. So we also have a version of that split in the API, which is why iVector vector search is distinct. First of all, there's a limiting idea here that if in a normal application, say in DI, you're going to get injected with this, and then you only have access to the search methods because you will not typically need to ever do upsert and so on. So we kind of want to get it out of the user's point of view. So if in general they're just going to be needing to search in that sort of scenario. So this is a restricting view kind of interface. Also, another argument for this is that we foresee various wrapping implementations where only the search would be relevant. So I'll give an example. I plan to look at some point at a way where you take EF core, which is completely unrelated to all of this, but you take EF core, you take a link query, which you've already expressed via EF core, and then you've got one, like some extension method that you can tack on, which converts it into an iVector search. So you can take basically any EF core query and kind of now treat it as a vector search and call search over it. That would be a good case where we have an iVector search and we only need to implement these two things, and we don't have to be bothered with all of the CRUD operations and collection management things. So first of all, how does this look to people, this sort of split?
It makes sense, I think.
I mean, I'm always skeptical of interfaces. You say you want it to be a view limiting thing. If you actually want it to be a view limiting thing, then you need to make it a class, because otherwise somebody's just going to slap iVector search on the collection. And then now they can cast and get back into the collection. Granted, they could probably pull it out of the DI thingadoo anyway, but...
So collections already all of them implement iVector search, right?
Oh, fair
all
enough.
of the collections.
Fair enough.
Yeah, my understanding was that this wasn't to forbid insertion. It was just kind of to get those methods out of the way when you don't need it, right?
Yep, that's it. And for the case where you need to do some sort of composing on top, and all you're concerned with is searching, so you don't want to have to implement all the other stuff and say not supported or whatever.
Yeah, because I kind of see this almost as Well, I see this almost as iRead-only list, right? Where, like, yes, you could cast an iRead-only list back to a list, but it means that if you're taking an API, or if you're calling an API that only ever needs to perform queries, then it opens the world to you. Like, you can pass more things into it.
Except if I remember correctly, iList doesn't extend iRead-only list, right? Unfortunately, like we'd like it to, but right. It's there was some problem.
But the list class itself does.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so then that part of it is okay. Naming wise, it's a tiny bit odd for me that this is called search. Like I would gravitate toward something like a searchable collection, because what it is it exposes search is not a thing, right? You can search via that thing. It's a verb on the methods that you can call, but the interface itself doesn't represent a search. But then we could call this a searchable collection. The problem is, and this gets a bit more complicated, there's another type of search that MEVD supports, and here we also need to discuss naming, and that's what we call hybrid search. In 2 words, hybrid search is a search where you're not just doing vector similarity search, which is what we've been discussing so far. You're providing a vector, but you're also providing keywords. And that basically does a full text search of those keywords, which is a completely different type of search. And then it combines the results of the vector similarity search and the full text keyword search. It combines them together via a fusion method, like something that fuses together the results and gives you back that result. That's kind of like the state of the art for doing good searching. You combine both semantic searching via vectors and also full text searching via keywords, basically. Because we expose this, we have another interface here, and that's also called something search. In that case, it's keyword hybrid search, because there might be another type of hybrid search. So sorry, I'm a bit kind of all over the place, but it's kind of important for how to get the overall view of what this is like. Is everything I said clear, first of all, maybe?
Yep.
The reality here is a little bit complicated and moving fast anyway. Yeah, so basically, are the names iVector search and iKeyword hybrid search? What do people feel about this, and what would be the alternative? I'd love like iSearchable collection, but then we have like iKeyword hybrid searchable collection that doesn't work so much anymore, and so on and so forth.
I will say that one of the guidelines about interfaces is if they actually just end in able, that's a much better design for an interface than if you try naming it a noun. So they should be
searchable
adjectives. So that would be
I
keyword hybrid searchable and I vector searchable. Those are weird, but you kept then wanting to say collection after it, and it is that the collection that implements it is the vector searchable collection. So
have you used searchable before? Or like
we don't have it here in this API.
No, I just mean like ever, like, or seekable. I mean, I know there's iDisposable. I'm just thinking like how much do we actually follow that guidance?
Enumerable and disposable are the ones that I can think of.
Yeah. And then we gave up. It's like the 2 core interfaces, and you're like, nah.
Yeah, those 2 are almost right. Everything else is wrong.
I personally don't hate iVector searchable and iKeyword hybrid searchable. I kind of like it.
I quite like it as well. I don't think we need collection in there because the whole point of these interfaces are to be able to implement it across other types of data sources where a collection isn't necessarily that important, like the EF core scenario. So yeah, I think I quite like that.
Wait, so it'd be iVector searchable and okay, and then the keyword hybrid thing. Would we put vector back in there since searchables, or no?
The hybrid kind of contains the vector in a sense. It's hybrid in the sense that it's a hybrid over vector and full text search. We don't want to start saying both like vector and full text search and hybrid in the type name, because that's a mouthful. I think we think that's good enough, basically. Like when you say hybrid search in this domain, it's relatively understood.
And the keyword is there because you can have other types of hybrid search as well. For example, using sparse vectors instead of keywords, you can have in theory you can have hybrid search over other types as well, not just text, but it becomes a bit meaningless and weird, I suppose. But it is essentially a set of keywords. This is a very specific hybrid search implementation that we've done, which is essentially keyword plus vector, as opposed to sparse vector plus dense vector, which is another option. Yeah.
There's a lot of complexity in this domain, unfortunately, but I guess it's not super relevant for this crowd, for this decision making. Okay, so I'm going to assume that the naming is that we're okay with the naming, exactly with keyword hybrid searchable. These remain interfaces, by the way, just to avoid any doubt, unlike the collection and the store, which are going to become abstract base classes. But these really are interfaces. That's the whole point of what they are. So now
Well, so I'll just.
Are we talking about the members? or are we just talking names right now?
No. We're also talking about the members in a second. I just wanted to start off with that.
Yeah. So for the hybrid, I'm just gonna float the question of keyword hybrid or hybrid keyword. Because if you said there's a second hybrid, and I'll just use the word truck, you could have truck hybrid search versus keyword hybrid search, or you would get them together with a hybrid keyword search and hybrid truck search, and then you'd be like, oh right, there are two kinds of hybrid search. Because sorry, yes, thank you.
See how unnatural it is?
No, I'm looking. It's unnatural to pronounce words that aren't present. I'm reading a thing on a screen.
I'm kidding.
Yeah. So the you also note I didn't read the I. So so that's just a question of, do you want the hybrid at the beginning for affinity?
So the hybrid defines the type of search that it is. The search is a hybrid search as opposed to just a vector search, whereas the keyword modifies the kind of hybrid search it is. There's multiple types of hybrid searches, and one of them is a keyword hybrid search, which for me means that hybrid should be last.
Okay. I was sort of thinking,
does that make sense?
As it's vector hybrid parentheses keyword, vector hybrid parentheses truck, and because I don't know what any other options are, but this way's fine. I'm just asking the question.
Okay, understood. Okay, so now moving to the members. So first of all, let's go back to iVector search. That's the more interesting one here. So first of all, we've got the same get service that we saw before for logging purposes and composition and getting out internal like whatever services that are needed from a consumer. I'm going to assume that's uninteresting. We're moving the experimental, as we already said on Tuesday. And now for the main thing I actually wanted to discuss regarding these APIs. We have two APIs here for searching. The first one is what you saw before, which is the low-level searching API. I'm gonna maybe switch over to this thing here so that we can see it. So the actual invocation looks like this. You have a vector in the form of a read-only memory of float, an array of float, doesn't matter for this particular thing. And you've already generated the embedding, right? So this is already something that's been generated, and therefore we call this search embedding. The reason for this is that we also have the search API, which is like this thing I kind of pushed forward. I'm not sure everybody else kind of agreed. I'm gonna push it forward here as well, and I want to see what people think. The idea here is, as I said also on Tuesday, is we don't want to expose people necessarily to embedding generation. It's a technical implementation detail under the hood. What people actually want to do from a high-level user perspective is to search for similarity on strings. They want to be able to provide a string as input and get similar, like records where that string is similar, basically. The fact that behind the scenes, this has to undergo embedding generation and then, all that kind of stuff, and there's a read-only memory float in there and all that is something that I was really thinking should be hidden away from the user unless they want to be exposed to it. So if they do want to be exposed to it, they have this search embedding async, and that's why we've got this very explicit embedding word in here. But I'd love to orient users towards this thing. And to remind people how this works, if you want to use this API, you have to tell us, in most cases, what the embedding generator is. And if we go up, you do this by getting some sort of embedding generator from somewhere, an OpenAI embedding generator. And early when you're setting up at the point of DI setup, let's say, this is the point where you're telling us the default embedding generator should be this. So you pre-configure, basically, you tell us in advance what the embedding generator should be. And once you've done that, you can call this API and this will be picked up automatically. We've got, you can configure an embedding generator. You can give a default. In fact, like the first getting started sample that I want to show for this is you basically inject an embedding generator into DI. You don't even do it for MEVD, and MEVD picks up the embedding generator from DI, and that just percolates through, propagates everywhere, and becomes your default. So the very getting started is add OpenAI to your service collection, add an MEVD connector, and then call search. That simple. And you're just dealing with strings. That's kind of like the way I feel this API should look like. However,
so for the search that takes the strings, that doesn't take the embedding generator directly, right? The expectation is you've already wired that up.
Exactly, and that's very important. We've talked about this. You should never be varying an embedding generator per call because that doesn't make any sense. The whole point here is this is a collection, and you have to be using the same embedding generator for all of the records in the collection. Otherwise, your embeddings are belong to completely different spaces of meaning, and you can't search over them anymore. It's all nonsense now. So it's very much a property configuration.
Right. So what's the reason that the method that takes a string has to be on the same type as the method that takes the vector directly, considering that you've already supplied an embedding generator and you can't change it, or you shouldn't change it?
So are you asking if we should have like two interfaces for these two methods, something like that?
Yeah, basically.
So that's how it was at some point,
Okay.
Interestingly enough. The point is more that, yeah, so we could, I'm not sure what the point of that exactly would be, since the idea here is that all collections basically have to implement both of these. That's kind of the idea. So all connectors, like the SQL Server, the Postgres, all of them will support this thing, assuming you've configured, like the user has configured an embedding generator, right? So then at that point, you see what I mean? It's kind of like, what would be the point of splitting it into two different interfaces?
It seems like it's modal, right? So you have like two versions of these types of objects. There's one where the embedding generator is pre-configured, and then you should always call the string. And then there's one where it's not, and you're forced to do it yourself.
That's
and
true.
You don't know which version of the object you got. Whereas if you got, an object that either takes a string or takes the embedding, then you know.
Right. So then, like in my mind, a user set, this is the developer's application. They know that they either code their application with an embedding generator inside, and then they can just assume that they can call search async everywhere. And if they don't do that, then they don't do that, and therefore they always use search embedding. In other words, if you call this and you get an exception because you didn't configure an embedding generator, that's like a programming bug. It's not an exception to be caught. It's more like a null reference exception in the sense that you've basically misconfigured the API, and therefore you can't use this method, something like that. I hope
but that's why I started with asking why they have to be on the same type, because like the type saving system could save you. Like it could just be impossible. Well, in the case where you configured an embedding generator, you configured DI or whatever to not give you the thing that lets you pass the embedding directly. It's only the strings. Or if you don't configure it, you always have to pass the embedding. And so you always know based on the type system, like whether it's configured or not.
Yeah. So if we always only took an embedding generator from DI, we could simply not inject the interface that has this thing. And at that point, if you try to get injected with it, you get a failure. It's not very different from the failure you would now get today if you tried actually calling this. It's earlier because it's a failure at injection time instead of at invocation time. But another so I think the value here is somewhat limited, right? At the end of the day, you've made the same mistake of saying, I want the interface. I intend to use, to give a string, but I didn't configure the embedding generator, so I get a runtime exception.
Can I respond to that? Like, yeah, because I'm not sure I agree with that, because like you could say, your nullable annotation could be wrong, and like and it could still throw a null reference exception at runtime. But like, sure, it could be. But like the point of having separate types is I have a way to represent in my application code that this is the one that I have configured. That's all. It's not like the biggest thing.
So the other problem here, I get what you're saying. The other problem that makes this even more difficult is it's not just about a thing that gets in from DI. Like if, do I have an example here? Right, so here we're configuring the product via the type via attributes, but you can also give an embed, I don't have a code sample for this. You can basically give a record definition here. And then rather than using attributes, you can basically configure all your properties. And you can, on each property, you can say, here, I want this embedding generator, and there I want that embedding generator. This is for, let's say, slightly more advanced scenarios. But if, for example, you're storing both text and images in your vector databases in different, basically different types of content, then you might need two different embedding generators there. And at that point, there's no way in terms of type safety for us to know whether search would succeed or not. We can't, basically, we don't have that information at the type level, only at the runtime level.
Right, and I figured that's when you would drop down to the interface that takes the embedding directly, right? So the string would be the kind of the nullably annotated, like I promise you that I've attached the embedding generator type, and then the thing that takes the embedding is the low level. I want to switch the embedding based on modes type. But
yeah, I mean,
again, this is just like
it
a
doesn't make sense
not a
to me
must.
because at the end of the day, the collection is implementing both interfaces. So if you're looking at the collection, both methods are visible.
Okay.
Exactly. Exactly.
But Shai, you said image, and chat has asked, you're pushing text. How does somebody search for image similarity?
Good, a very good question. So if you actually look at the signature for this, which we should do, you will see that search, in fact, can accept anything rather than string. So this is a generic method, but it is unconstrained over the T input, which means that you will be able to pass an image in. What is an image is a great question. Any questions on that already? I know everybody.
I do just want to finish. Like, I know, like, Jeremy kind of moved on, but he had, like, you know, oh, the collection implements both interfaces anyway. I just want to point out, like, feel free to ignore this, but, like, my suggestion was not that the collection would implement both interfaces, right? The thing is, like, you'd have a method that takes an embedding generator that would return a thing that implements the new interface that only takes strings. Like, that would be the proposal.
So a decorator, like a composability decorator thing.
Right, and don't have to do it, but I'm just pointing out, like, I'm not suggesting that you just have the collection and implement two separate interfaces. But yeah, definitely don't have to.
I'm just to give another answer to this. So the problem here is that what I was just saying doesn't only impact. That's another point of this. Doesn't only impact searching. It also impacts CRUD operations. So if we go back to the collection, you also have Upsert as well. And the T record that you have here is a .NET type. And if you've configured an embedding, like an embedding generator, then that type. If I go, maybe I should just keep this thing open here. Basically, you would have a string here rather than a read-only memory of flow. And basically, I'm saying that whether you've configured an embedding generator or not doesn't affect only the search async versus search embedding async. It also affects what property you can put here on your .NET type, which you can then upsert, right? Because we also want this to make your upsertion easier, right? You just put a string in.
The string overload? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, this is not even this is not a function. This is just what is a valid .NET type for you to have a vector property on in MEVD. It's like just that you've got the search side of it and you've got the upsert side of it.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess that's maybe I should have just started with that answer because we were focusing on the search side of it.
Yes, we can move on. Sorry to.
I mean, I
belabored the point.
I get what you're saying, and we actually had like a prototype via decorators first, and so on. Like we've gone back and forth on this, so I absolutely think what you're saying makes sense. It's just that in the end, the typing here doesn't work well, unfortunately.
Got it. Cool.
Yeah. Sorry, Jeremy. Now you were saying something.
So you have a T input.
Yes.
How does that flow or function? Like the T input came from nowhere else, so do you get the runtime exception that you can't, that your embedding generator didn't support it? That's
correct. Exactly. So it's your responsibility. This is another topic that we've talked about a lot. So in general, you know what? Let's even talk about a simpler thing. Even search embedding async is not constrained. You can see you have a T vector here. And at this point, right now, it can be anything. And the reason for this is that there's one database. In one database, you will want to pass in a read-only memory of float. In another, it might be a read-only memory of half. In yet another, there's like some databases support sparse vectors, where it's not just a string of, an array of floats in memory, but rather some representation that allows super high dimensionality. And at that point, the representation is completely different internally. So there's some special type for sparse vectors. And we've discussed the fact that there is no standard exchange type for sparse vectors in .NET. Might be something we want to work on in the future. But the main point here is that we don't know what an embedding type is going to be in, and that's going to vary by database, unfortunately. We definitely are standardizing like de facto on read-only memory of float as something that every database should support, but then from there could be various other things. So that's already also an open thing that the user has to know by looking at their database documentation. which is never a great thing. It's also the same, like if you look at something like ADO.NET, like system data, if you talk to a database, every database has its own list of types. Postgres supports IP address because it has a type for IP addresses. It supports string arrays because it has arrays. SQL Server doesn't have arrays. So you're in this very open sort of, always in serialization and databases, you're in this sort of open place.
Fair enough. I mean, that does feel to me like a pretty good reason of pushing embedding or search embedding down. Of this is very, very, very much you need to know what you're doing, as opposed to the embedding generator knew how to map A to B for you.
So let's dive into that just a little bit, because it's one of the questions that we have. Forget about the embedding generator for 1 second. MEAI has an embedding generator, which we've been discussing, and it returns something called an embedding. Maybe I can even show you guys this thing because I have it here. So this is embedding generator. Now we're in MEAI, not an MEVD. This is just a marker interface. As you can see, it doesn't actually have any content.
Can you give us a couple control pluses on that, please? Thanks.
Thank you, of course. Like that, right?
Yep.
Is that okay? Okay. MEAI comes with this sealed class. This is an embedding of T, which extends embedding, that marker-based class. And that's just a wrapper over read-only memory of T. So this kind of expresses the fact that in .NET, a dense embedding is expected to be a read-only memory of T. There's nothing for sparse because we don't have anything to say about sparse. There's no standardized representation, as I was saying. So there's this whole kind of thing, which is the output of an embedding generator. And one thing that's not clear to my mind is whether, if we go back to our API, we could in here accept an embedding. So constrain this to an embedding, or just accept an embedding rather than having it be generic at all. So that the user basically to constrain the thing. If we do that though, there's several things to be said about this. For the Postgres sparse vector type that they have, they would now need to introduce a wrapper for it that extends embedding just so that users can pass this in, which is kind of why, like what's the point at that point? Another important thing is that embedding, the embedding that you see here doesn't, maybe I'll go back here. It doesn't actually add anything of interest. Sorry, I didn't actually show you guys this. What it adds, in addition to the read-only memory of float that you saw before, it has a model ID to identify what kind of embedding model generated it, when was it created, and various additional properties. This is all very loose, so all of it is nullable. It doesn't have to be populated. It's sort of metadata on this embedding that you generated. None of this is of slightest interest to the vector database. So if you were to pass us an embedding, we would just unwrap it, discard what you're seeing, and just take the read-only memory of float and shove it into the database. Which is why I'm kind of like, why would we constrain? Why would we force users to give us this thing when we don't? When the only thing we need is what it actually wraps. And the last point that I want to say on this, I know I'm talking a lot, but this is a bit complex. The last point is that in my mind, if you're using an embedding generator, then I expect you to configure it with MEVD and just use this API, at which point you don't care about embeddings at all. So if you are using this thing, that means maybe you've got your embeddings dumped on disk in binary format or something. You're not using an embedding generator. And at that point, if you've got it on disk, then requiring an embedding here would force you to just wrap it, like to just add a wrapper around it, just so because we expect that type here. So I'm kind of like not sure that receiving an embedding here is the right thing, but there's also a part of me that says it's much more strongly typed and it's less open, and that's also a good thing. Wesley, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, so I just noticed as we were looking at this, typically we've been avoiding the term embedding in the interface because it doesn't have to be an embedding. An embedding is a specialization of a vector, and everywhere else we're just referring to vectors. So I think part of this conversation probably is also like, should we be calling it search vector async? And then we accept any kind of vector versus search embedding, and it's maybe typed to a more narrow embedding type.
That makes sense to me. I agree. If we keep the API as it is and not constrain it to embedding, then we should rename it to vector. And that's also how the embedding type in the MEAI talks about it. There's an embedding and it wraps a vector. That's true. I'm going to shut up now.
The only concern that I would have with that one is somebody's using this because they know they want to do quote unquote vector search. And now if you name it search and search vector, then they're like, oh, search vector's the thing I want to do. So I wonder if using vector here is, instead of steering someone away from it, going to steer them toward it.
I have a question regarding the naming. Shai, when you were referring to both methods, you have said it's just similarity search. Have we considered calling it similarity search?
Sure, we can. That was one of the options at some point. My main idea is to really do the best we can to steer users towards it and make it as short and as defaulty as possible. And search just seems like the best way to do it. That's how you do a search on a vector database. That's how documentation talks about it. So I don't like saying similarity kind of overqualifies it. By definition, a search here is more of a similarity search. I would say, like the default thing, but we can.
Yeah, I mean, like if you want to steer people away from the second and you want to use vector, then at least in crypto we shove in the 3 little letters RAW to scare people away. Search raw vector, and you're like, I don't know what a raw vector is. I'm going to go with the easy thing. So
I kind of like it, but then I guess first of all, there's the question of whether this should maybe receive an embedding. At which point we wouldn't have to have this conversation at all, because it would just be called search embedding, and everything would align. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? I guess it's a bit too specific there or something.
So based on the words you've said, which is my only understanding of the space, if you're already clearly tightly integrated with MEAI because you take embedding generators, so that means that you sort of want to use words in the same way that they do. And if their embedding is supposed to represent dense, but you can also accept here sparse, and they don't have a way to say sparse, then you shouldn't use their word and make somebody else rap.
The base type in MEI is not necessarily dense. The derived embedding of T is dense. The base embedding could have a future sparse embedding that derives from it. We just don't have one today.
Right, but then if this needs to figure out how to extract the data from it, like if this just took embedding instead of a specific kind of embedding of T, the current embedding of T, then it would have no way of understanding how to extract the data off the thing because the base class doesn't provide data, it only provided metadata.
The implementation would need to type test.
Exactly. Which is what it already does. Like even today, you put in a read-only memory of float, or a read-only memory of half. The implementation, the connector has to look at it and see, oh, it's a read-only memory of float versus half. I'm going to do this or that. I mean, it works. There's no it can work to pass in an embedding, and I there's a part of me that likes it because it constrains the parameter type. It's that simple, basically. But on the other hand, it kind of it imposes some busy work on the user, useless busy work in various scenarios, which kind of why.
If we wanted to have an extension method overload, quote quote overload of search embedding async that took an embedding, would it be able to delegate to this search embedding async of T vector in any meaningful way?
No, because even the types, the embedding subtypes that are recognized are connector specific. Like Postgres would have to have its own PG sparse vector embedding, which wraps a PG sparse vector, which I already hate, just forcing PG to have this type, and then that extension method would not know, like that you propose, right?
Do we need to add to embedding some sort of non-generic object returning get me the data method?
I don't know. I mean, even if, yeah, I don't know. Even if it did, it would be, yeah, it would be an object, whereas this thing currently accepts a generic. Yeah, I don't know.
It
Yeah,
does,
it
but
accepts it.
presumably, like this accepting a generic, the implementation is still doing type testing. It just is it it's a question of, is it doing type testing off of vector.get type, or is it doing type testing off of type of T vector?
Yeah,
And
yeah. The fact that it's generic helps doing the type testing in a significant way, but of course we can also do without it, which is what we do in Upsert. In Upsert, we don't have the generic type because that's how Upsert looks like, and we do it anyway. It's just more complex. But yeah, to answer your question, you're right.
I guess I'm wondering if this should be generic at all, or if sorry, is this an interface, or is
this is an interface? Yes.
Okay. Or if we tell implementers, like, this is generic for, so that wait, where's T vector's only an input position?
It is.
So that, and that's the only place it doesn't show up later in the signature, does it?
No, it does not. It's only constrained.
So it could just be object if we wanted it to be.
It could be object, yes. That exactly. It could be. That would only make the implementation inside the connector slightly more complicated, but it's possible, yes.
Well, would it? I mean, the implementations already need to be able to special case different T vector types, right? They already need to have a check for if type of T vector equals type of blah. And in some way, and that's not really any more difficult than if vector is read-only memory of float.
It's if you look at the implementation of this, you'll see that you know what, let's leave that point. Regardless, let's leave implementation aside because it is possible, so yeah. Let's leave it basically.
Because I'm trying to if we were to do that, or if we were to tell implementers you always need to account for the possibility that T vector is object, then we could, in theory, have a search embedding async extension method that took an arbitrary embedding and unwrapped its data and passed it in. We could do that no problem for an embedding of T because we have the ability to access the ROM. For the base non-generic, we would need to add something to embedding that would extract the data.
Mm-hmm. Like public object get data.
Yeah.
Or get back to using the current terminology. Yeah.
I'll ask. So if this changed to object, then all of the type testing, none of the type testing can be compile time eliminated by the the AOT, because if it's generic type testing, then that's constant folded, and if it's runtime type testing, then the code stays live. Is that a concern of yours, Steve? You usually push for trimmability.
I'm assuming most of these T vectors are not. Well, I guess ROM is a struct. I was going to say I'm assuming most of them are not struct, but actually they might be.
On the other hand, there's not a lot of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, I ask questions. I don't have opinions. Well, I mean, I often have opinions, but in this case, I'm just asking questions.
If in your current implementation, Shai and Wesley, do you special case both read-only memory of float and embedding of float, or just read-only memory of float?
So right now we only allow you to pass in read-only memory of float, and we don't support embedding, which could also be a fail. Users might expect to try to send an embedding, especially given the name, which is unfortunate. Yeah. Certainly with an ending. I absolutely see that now. Like I didn't see this before. So yeah, like the current thing, T vector has to be a vector in the embedding sense of the word, and cannot be an embedding. We can rename this, but we can also do the thing that you said, which is to introduce the unwrap method on the non-generic embedding, and then have an extension method. We could go those ways, yeah. I kind of like the idea of unwrapping the embedding basically, and then it's just an extension method, and then users users can do both. I kind of like it.
I mean,
it's typed.
Even if the implementation caught, so if you have a strong compile time reference to an embedding and it catches the extension method, you'd still need to basically do that unwrap inside every implementation in case they had a weakly typed embedding.
So search embedding, the extension method, would only accept an embedding, right? Parameter.
Right, but if you had an embedding cast as object, it's going to bypass the extension method and call search embedding
but the names,
object.
Oh, I see. But the names are going to be different, right? Like we would have search embedding the extension method, and here we would have presumably search raw vector.
Oh, fair enough.
And you,
yeah, imagine we would have like search async, search vector async, search embedding async, or something like that.
Okay.
And
right.
Ideally, the last one could be built on top of the former.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right.
And you would still have somebody trying to pass maybe an embedding to the search vector because they can. It's not constrained, and then that would fail.
I think that I'm not concerned about that if we just rename the word embedding to vector here, because then it's like,
sure.
hey,
yeah,
even on embedding, like the vector word shows up as something different than embedding.
Yes. Yeah. By the way, another option here is to go a bit more weakly typed and have whatever search embedding or vector, and just allow users to pass in both, and then do the unwrapping inside the connector implementation rather than in an extension. And then that prevents users from ever getting confused. They pass the ROM, they pass the embedding of T, everything works. That's also a possibility.
Yeah, but it does mean that you're establishing a pattern that everybody has to do, because there's no type here to provide a common implementation for people. It's again a thing I don't like about interfaces.
For the implementations, you mean? You're
yeah,
talking about the
every individual implementation has to follow both test this as an embedding, test this as one of the other 6 types I support.
That's right. Yeah.
Otherwise, you get inconsistencies.
I mean, we already have, because these are even for Upsert-based classes, we already have this problem in many areas of the API, and we basically are leaning hard on very big, very like thorough conformance tests to make sure that implementations do this. But I mean, it's not ideal, obviously.
Yeah, I was misunderstanding the suggestion of the. I guess that's why Steve said "quote unquote" overload. I thought it was going to be search embedding of object and search embedding of embedding, and that's where I was concerned that the weakly type would slip through.
Right.
I think I would be inclined to say that this is just search vector async, and you're supposed to just pass in the raw vector data. And then if we want, we can have a search embedding async with no other changes to any AI that takes an embedding of T, which it can just delegate to search vector async with the ROM that it gets out of the embedding. And then we don't have a story right now for other embedding derived types, but in the future we could add another extension method that was another search embedding async overload that took the base class embedding or some other derived class that's built into the box, and somehow extract the data and still call to this search embedding async, or search vector async rather.
Okay, so then, because we don't see any value in adding to non-generic embedding the possibility to extract the vector, right? That's basically the point.
There might be value, but I don't think we see the complete picture yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't hear that as not do it. I heard it as Steve's plan allows the option of doing it in the future without breaking things.
Right. The downside is we do it in the future, the embedding base class, whatever method we add there would have to, the default implementation would need to throw, or it would need to have a can get embedding or something, because if we're not adding it now. Or we add it now and we can make it work on all known embedding, derived types. Maybe Shai, it'd be worth just me and Wesley syncing up offline and figuring out for other non-embedding of T types, like how we would actually flow things through and use that to determine. And just in this meeting here, just decide this is gonna one of two things that everyone here is okay with. Either this is called search embedding async, and every implementation tests for everything, or this is called search vector async and only takes the vector data. We add a search embedding async extension that works with embedding of T, and we figure out if it's possible to add other stuff. And if it's possible to add other stuff, we'll have an email-based review of that other stuff or something like that.
Wesley?
Yeah, so I'm just kind of wondering whether that pushes us in a direction where a sparse vector will have a two kind of views, I suppose. That there's some sort of raw data model for a sparse vector and the embedding type that wraps it, and whether I suppose with the embedding types, their kind of purpose is to wrap things. Maybe that's okay, and we're saying that's okay as well in future. I suspect that ultimately, I think I've seen two different sparse vector representations. They're fairly easily convertible between each other. It's a wrapper type kind of makes sense probably in that you might want to pass in one representation and be able to read out the other representation without needing to worry about conversions and so on. Maybe similar to the data content type that we have. But yeah, it's. I suspect that we'll probably have something fairly, we'll probably support something fairly simple there as well.
My concern with the sparse thing is that it shouldn't be impossible to create like a standard thing or whatever, but there's simply currently several options. Like the PG vector one really does have its own because there was no other option, right? And at that point, users have to be able to pass that thing in, et cetera, et cetera. That's basically.
I would say though, users probably don't care about the PG vector type when they're using the abstraction. They probably expect to be able to pass in something that like read-only memory or float, which again, different databases expect different, well, they're all basically either it's a JSON array or it's some sort of binary packed object. So we still have to do conversion there. I think it's just that we don't really we haven't really decided what does it look like. What is the common sparse vector type looks like for ourselves. But I can see there being sort of value in having there's two kind of common representations, I think, outside of the PG vector space, which is a dictionary with the index of the location and the sparse vector and the value, and then the other representation is two arrays with one array being the indexes and the other array being the values, and ultimately converting between those two are fairly trivial.
I think we could probably rat hole on this for another hour. I suggest the three of us take this offline and we move on here.
Agreed.
Yeah,
so I think the take. Yeah, go ahead, Jeremy.
I was going to say my vote is search raw vector async of vector, and then that search embedding async gets added as extension methods now or later.
Is everybody okay with the raw, like to ward people away, basically?
I don't know that the raw is necessary. It mentally, I don't necessarily see a big distinction between raw vector and vector.
The concern that I gave, I think, is right before you joined, Steve. It's if somebody knows that they want to do a vector search and then they find search vector, they may lean toward that one when the intent is to lean them away from that one.
I see.
Yeah.
So it's,
maybe they think search is some weird other thing, and what they want is a vector search, right?
Yeah. So it's more about getting them to lean away from it and call the friendlier one. But we can leave it out. I threw it in there as the.
I captured it there as a optional suggested part of the name.
Okay, but all the rest of this makes sense to me. Yeah. I will note there was another alternative design here if we're going more in a Python-y direction, which is actually if we are in a place where the same method kind of can operate both on embeddings and on read-only memory, you could even go further in that thing and just say, okay, even collapse these two things together, search async and search embedding. And at that point, you can give anything. If it's not a recognized embedding type, like it's a string, then we do the embedding generation path. And if it is, then we do the raw path. So basically not have the two methods. In general, in .NET, we like to separate APIs which do different things. But here, it's not exactly that they do different things. It's just that there's an additional step of embedding generation if you pass in a non-compatible, like a non-native kind of type. So I was a little bit hesitating. It might actually be kind of easy to just say, just have search. You pass in whatever you want. It can be a read-only memory float. It can be a string, and we'll just take care of it for you, basically.
My only my concern with that one is that if you ever get a kind of data that it thinks it understands that also would support running through the embedding generator that you've provided, there's no way to disambiguate that. We either say things that could be embedding generated get embedding generated, or we say things that are understood get understood. And worse, this is an interface, so it'll be half of them do it one way and half of them do it the other. So I like the split names.
I'm with you, like, because I'm a .NET person in a way, but I don't actually think there's pragmatically going to be a scenario where, like, what is an embedding and what is not an embedding is fairly clear, I think. I might be,
I think I don't see a lot of confusion. I think it would come down to degenerate cases like a byte array, which could represent an image or could represent a 1 byte, an 8-bit embedding.
Yeah, byte array is what I was thinking of, where something is, this is the loose data, and you need to normalize it.
So importantly, our way to represent images is a data content, which is an MEAI type that wraps a byte array, but also a MIME type, because we need to know is it a PNG or a JPEG or even sound, right? Because byte array doesn't tell you what it is.
Yeah, I don't know that it's a huge concern. I think it would be, again, I think we should talk about this offline, but I think it would be worthwhile writing out a real example in a bunch of different designs and see which one we like the best, because we're pushing different concerns to different people. And it's not clear to me just from looking at this which is the best choice.
Okay. All right, then I'll schedule a call for next week or tomorrow.
And Adam had some comments around all this that we didn't talk to specifically either, so make sure that stuff's incorporated into that as well.
Okay. All right. I think we've gone through most of what I wanted to discuss here.
Chat asks, while we're talking about search methods, is there a batch search?
There is no batch search. As far as I know, most databases don't have such a feature. We could introduce it in the future, I guess.
Okay.
Yep. We'd have to be careful of typing. For batching, for get and update, we just overload on the parameter type, but here the parameter types are very open. Like they're not constrained, so that would be a problem. We'd have to disambiguate via the name, I think. Any other questions there? Okay, how much time do we have left? Okay, we're pretty good. All right, I think that's more or less what I wanted to ask regarding the search. Wesley, is there anything in mind regarding search that you think we need to discuss?
No, I think we covered everything.
Okay, I'm gonna jump back to get at this point. So we're going back to the collection. Right, so we have 3 flavors of get. I'm kind of reminding people from Tuesday. We've got a get where you give a key and you get the thing. That's pretty trivial. We've got the batching edition of the same thing. That's also pretty trivial. Then we have the third type of get, which is a filtering get. Okay, so you get an expression here. This can be an arbitrary expression. The same sort of filter expression you can pass to search, by the way. I didn't really mention this. I was assuming this was kind of understood, but basically in search you can do this. So you give a filter here. Maybe I will say a couple words on this. There's an optional options object here. to search async, and one of the things on it is the filter expression, and this this parameter is generic over the record type so that you can provide that filter in a strongly typed manner. I hope that all makes sense. The same thing exists on get async, only it's its own parameter rather than something inside an optional option bag because it's required. So it had users have to provide it basically.
I don't know if we talked about this with search, but it looks like it showed up there as well. The int top, that's like number of results you want, I assume.
Yes. Yes. Exactly.
Is top a well understood term?
So
here?
from relational databases, we usually call like SQL Server calls this top, other databases call this limit, but most vector databases do call this top or K. K is the other, maybe a bit slightly more mathematically oriented term. Top seems to be fairly like the standard here, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. And by the way, this is mandatory as opposed to optional. It used to be optional, but yeah, we're basically forcing you to do this. This is also a forcing users to think about limits kind of thing. There's no good default here anyway. Like we used to have a default of 3. We had a whole discussion. Is 3 the right default? And of course, there is no really right default in general. So we just want to force the users to think upfront about this thing. So it makes, they have to think a little bit about more upfront, but then we think that this is the right thing to do. In general, one of...
Sorry, go ahead. I was going to ask, are the results from search or get, are they ordered by similarity or?
So search is about getting the results precisely by similarity. Sorry, where are we? Yeah, we're exactly here. So these two APIs, search async, when you have the verb search here, that means you're doing similarity or vector search, which implicitly means order by similarity. Vector search is basically an order by, right? It's basically an order by clause.
Right. So you are getting back from search, you're getting back results in like an ordered results. Descending.
Exactly. However, and that's exactly right. However, if you look at the other one, which we were starting to discuss now, which is this get here, this one is unordered by default. So there is no deterministic, if you just specify it like this, there's no deterministic ordering, which is also how databases work in general. So if you do a SQL query anywhere, then what you get is non-deterministic ordering.
And just to confirm, top is the appropriate name, whether it's ordered or not.
Yeah, I don't remember having seen a difference in terminology there.
Okay, great.
Like, it would be weird if we called it something else in these two different APIs. Like
okay.
Like it's defensible even in the sense that SQL Server calls it top as well. Like it's a bit Microsoft centric, I guess, which doesn't make me love it, but yeah.
Well, because SQL Server supports it as a left thing, like select top 5, but standard SQL it's a suffix clause of limit 5.
Limit, that's correct, exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah. This doesn't come, I'm not really justifying this with SQL Server. I'm justifying this more with the domain, the way that people talk about in the domain. It could also be limit. I think that could be a reasonable option.
Yeah, like I'd suggest like result limit across the board, but.
Wesley, do you have any thoughts or anything?
I don't have strong feelings about it either way. I think both work. I think both are well-known terms.
Okay.
If we decide to rename it, we also need to make sure we like the name skip, because the option back allows to set it as well.
Yeah. So limit and offset typically go together, and top and skip go together. And we have skip in the options bag, yeah.
Okay, yeah. I'm slightly leaning towards keeping it as is, but yeah, I don't really. I don't have a strong preference there either.
I don't feel that changing it will improve it significantly. So.
Yeah. Okay.
Fair enough.
Now there are some questions around this that Adam also raised as well. So you can see that these 3 methods all accept these option bags. 2 of them, the batching and the non-batching, get something called a get records options, and the third one gets a get filtered record options, because this one also has some other stuff like the skip and the order by. Whereas order by in the batching, the overloads that accept keys doesn't make any sense. You get the results back in the order of the keys that you specified. So there's no real meaning to any ordering, and definitely why would you want to skip anything here? That basically is meaningless. So first of all, these we originally had these two operations, and we added get async with a different name. We thought about this as a completely different operation, which it kind of is. And sometimes it has many times has a different name in the underlying low-level APIs, but we ended up actually collapsing it to be another overload of get async, because it kind of does the same thing. We're basically getting records here. We're not searching over them in the sense of vector similarity search. We are searching in the SQL search, right, with an expression tree. But we felt like this is the most kind of descriptive way of that's the thing that would make users understand what this is about. Like the distinction is between search and get in this API, basically. Does that kind of sit well with people?
It seems fine to me. My SQL brain says they're both select. So
right. Yeah, we have to be a bit careful not to be too SQL specific, because a lot of the implementations are really not at all SQL. The minority are SQL, but yeah. It's all good.
The only, if you were going to change it at all, I would call the first two get and the third one get where.
Get where, okay.
Just showing that you've got a different, that this is a little different, think about it a little differently. But
yeah, okay.
Chat has asked, can T-key, right now it does not, but could T-key allow ref struct?
I'm not sure. Like, I'm not sure what would be the scenario for a ref struct here. I'm trying to think about it.
It seems pretty constraining on an interface.
This will be a class. Vector store and the collection are changing to classes.
Oh yeah, that's a class. Yeah, exactly.
Even then, it seems pretty constraining.
Wait, does that work? Given that this is an async method, does this work?
It would have to be something where the key was instantly transformed into something else for the remainder of the async operation.
Right.
And when I said interface, I meant something where this is virtual, because then we're not controlling the implementation. And I don't think we want to constrain all possible implementations to have to keep this on the stack.
Yeah, I mean, not allowing it makes sense to me. It was a question that got asked.
Very concretely, like the types of keys allowed is a closed set for each database. We know them. They tend to be like, it's pretty straightforward: ints, strings, GUIDs, and the like. This is not a domain where like there's total openness in what you can put here anyway. So I don't see it personally.
Is it typical that? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to mention that there is one connector that supports multiple keys. Like you can.
Yeah.
So for this particular one, it could be a class that provides us all three, let's say, columns.
Yeah, but that's still, I still don't see a ref struct here though. That's still like a tuple or a class. We don't yet completely know how we represent this, but it would be like a tuple or a class of multiple things. Yeah.
Well, what I was going to get at is, isn't the typical implementation that T-key is actually going to be effectively a field on the record type?
It is. Absolutely.
And if the record is constrained to a class anyway in practice, how would you ever get a ref struct as a field? In practice.
So I think we said we're not constrained. We don't want to constrain it to a class. Like it can be a struct in theory. I meant
the T record, but
right.
Even if it's a struct, right? If it's not a ref struct, you can't have a ref struct field. That's the thing.
Right. I mean, just running with it, it could be a ref struct like the record in theory.
Well, except
maybe?
I think task doesn't allow ref struct, therefore.
Yeah.
T record can't allow ref struct, and therefore key can't allow ref struct. So, all right.
Yeah, like in theory, you could try divorcing them, but I think trying that just ends up causing more problems than it solves.
Yep. Okay. so I guess we can move along on that one. Naming of options bags. So we opted for relatively short names with no vector store prefix or anything like this. It's called get record option because it's a get operation and it returns a T record. Basically, this is likely not going to be said much if people use target typed new anyway, but I hope people are okay with the naming. One point that I think Adam also made offline is we are using the same type here for the batching and non-batching because we don't, the reason is we don't really need anything different, but if we ever do in the future, then we'd be kind of screwed. So maybe we want to split those things. I don't know. I mean, just be very defensive and future-proof. And at that point, I'm not sure what to call this one. Get batching, like batching get record options or something like that. I don't know.
What is, so I assume the expectation for the, I'll call it batch get, that for batch get, any key that's missing just yields null in that same position?
There's no, that's not a legal possibility. So when you're doing a batch get, all records have keys in the database. Like that's an invariant.
No. Not filtered get.
Oh,
the middle one.
Here, this one.
IEnumerable of key. So let's just say keys and int, and I give you 1 through 100 as the keys, and I only have 1, 5, and 7 are actually defined in the collection.
I see. Do you remember how this is implemented, Wesley?
Yeah, so we return the ones that we found. We do not return a set of. No, wait. Do we? I'm struggling to remember now if we return a set of nulls or not. It should be in the XML doc for that type. Let me just check.
I can actually even add the documentation here.
So for all of the relational connectors, we just do plain select where in. So whatever SQL returns, we do that.
Right. So that means that we don't return nulls.
So they're
found
relative ordered, but not positionally guaranteed.
Yep. So only found records are returned. So the result set might be smaller than the request keys. The method throws for any issues other than records not being found.
Okay, because so the only thing that I can think of that you would ever want to do differently in batch is control the answer of, do you want the nulls to tell you that the key wasn't found? And if that's a thing that you think that you might want, then I guess you would need a different options type.
Yeah. I don't see us having an option like that personally, but like people can always, I mean, maybe, I don't know. I'm not sure I would want to like introduce a new type just because we might add something like that.
I was just, you said you were talking to be defensive, and I'm like, what's an option you would do differently?
Yeah, it's a good point. That's
because
a good idea.
Either way, they can be written in terms of the other one. Like you'd lose some performance because you're guaranteed doing individual fetches, but you can call the one that returns null when it can't be found.
Okay, I'll take a note and we'll discuss offline, and I guess we'll probably leave these two to be the same, but maybe not. And then the third one, which is again a bit different, is called get filtered record options, which I hope is a name that people are kind of okay with. It's generic over the record type, just like the search options are generic so that we can express stuff like expression trees on them. And if you look at it, then what you will see, this is a bit of a confusing type a little bit, but the task is confusing. So there's simple stuff like include vectors, which is standard. Like, do you want vectors on the results? Typically you don't, but maybe you do. There's the skip that we discussed before. And then there's the order by, which is the important thing and which we had quite a hard time to design. In LINQ, in general, in LINQ, order by is something that you just, it's just an operator over an enumerable or a queryable. But here we don't have an enumerable or a queryable that you can compose order by on. It's more like, it's basically, it's not a list. It's not an enumerable, right? So Adam, by the way, Adam, if you want to talk to this, because you're the one who worked on it, or I'm happy to do it. I see some struggling with the mute.
Stuttering.
Sorry, Teams didn't allow me to unmute. You're doing a good job. So basically, what we wanted to have is we didn't want to use to expose something that takes IEnumerable or an expression, because users would be able to express something like toList. So we wanted to express something that gives the users the ability to tell us how to sort using given property in which way, like ascending or descending. So this is what we ended up with. It's something like it's both a builder and the final result. So you do ascending, and it returns this, so you can chain it. Yeah, like in the code sample over here. That's more or less it.
I'm glad you showed the code sample, because yeah, having a Fluent API with a property as opposed to a method is like a little unusual.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. One thing I noticed, by the way, Adam, just while writing this code sample is, if I'm not mistaken, one problem here is that you can't write this in line. You have to instantiate it, and then you mutate it via the builder API. So I can't just like fluently here, which is maybe not great. But yeah.
Especially if it supports chaining. Yeah, I would expect to be able to. Yeah, if it supports chaining, I'd expect to be able to use the chaining in line where I pass it into things.
Yeah, I'll also say you should try writing this in F# or some other language. So in general, nested types are discouraged because they're hard to work with. If it's the thing built it itself and you're just accessing properties on it, that becomes a lot easier. I do see here that it is nobody ever calls new or is writing the static type in your sample here, but if the order by is too hard to work with in languages that aren't C#, then you need a different design.
Yeah, so we would need something here, basically, where we can do something like that, right? This is basically what we're saying.
It almost looks like some new programming language with some point-free syntax. Just who needs underscore? All right, anyway. Ironically, it's always the point-free programming languages that have a lot of periods. Anyway.
Or I don't know. I'm just making this up, right?
I will try to find a issue, because we have discussed a few other alternatives, and I think there were code samples for all of them. Give me a
Thank you.
So why is order by a property instead of a method? I'm curious. I mean, I suppose it doesn't matter, but I would just figured the default would be a method.
A method like that you put where?
Just order by open parenthesis, close parenthesis. It's interesting because it's like, it's a verby thing, right?
Oh, you mean like
yeah,
like this, basically? Something like that? Then that method is like where does it come from?
I mean, it would be identical to the property getter. It's just more of a style thing. Though maybe there could be parameters, but probably not.
Yeah, like at least one alternative design that we had is like to say, this is actually a lambda, and then you can do something like, and then you can really just do elements order by descending, basically drop down to link. I remember we discussed this. There's like this sort of idea. Let me do this for a second.
And that would give you an iQueryable?
Yeah. So if we go down this direction, then this thing here is basically this is basically this is an iQueryable, and then you just compose link operators. But then it's weird because you've got order by for the name of the property, but you've also got order by here for the link operator that you put on it.
You could be like order callback, ordering, but yeah, it is a little weird. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, and another problem we had was that there would be nothing stopping users from using any other link methods there. They could do like order by, toList, skip, top.
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another
under constraint.
Another one is to have like more to Adam's like point. Yeah, I think this one is kind of maybe the thing we're looking for. Is basically go back to what Adam was saying, but just do it like this. So then, sorry.
So instead of an iQueryable, it'd be like a custom order by type.
Yeah, a lambda that accepts a builder and only exposes ascending and descending. In Spirit, Adam, that's what you did, right? It's just that it's a lambda.
Yes, it's a good idea. However, we were also worried if users outside of .NET team are familiar with expressions and functions. Like, would it be natural for them to provide a lambda here? Like,
I mean, we have it here. We have it like wherever we filter, because there we actually do have an actual expression tree that we translate, like a full one. So I'm personally not too concerned about it.
And if you, I mean, you could also just do like order by ascending, order by descending on options directly, right?
So the problem is you have to say which field, and then you can have an arbitrary number of these orderings, right? First by this, then by that, descending, then by this again, ascending, and so on.
How do you specify which? So, I mean, even if you did order by ascending, order by descending, like you would take the same parameters, right? So you could still specify the fields. Like it would still take the same callback. I'm just saying, like instead of introducing that intermediate property, just map that directly to the root of the options. Like it's not really even changing the API much, like from a fundamental perspective. But I'm talking about a syntactic sugar. So if you scroll up.
I think this is the same as a suggestion in the chat of just make the options type be its own builder. So then you can say the options, you just add the order by. So you get to say new, set the other things, and then
like
you need to wrap your new in parentheses, I think. But yeah.
Right.
Like this. I see.
That is kind of weird and ugly because new in parentheses is kind of weird and ugly, but.
Yeah, I mean, you would ideally have like, if you're going to do a builder, if we do make the options type a builder, then maybe there'd be like a factory, like options.create or something. I don't know, but
I'm personally more liking this than this weird composing on top of the options. But yeah, I can see.
I like the one that Shai said he just liked.
Which is
it's easier to discover.
Line 50.
Yeah.
That's another good point, Adam. Yeah, because otherwise a person has to know that they can compose. Like they can't just look at the properties that you have inside this thing. Okay.
Yeah. So in that case, the nested type.
To be fair, right? Like I'm not suggesting that this is like only a Fluent API, right? Like you could. And I'm seeing how it's okay. So I will say I'm a little bit like used to configuring options and callbacks, and since that's not always how this is used, that does become a worse API. Sorry, it took me a second, but you understand. Like if you were configuring this option in the callback, it wouldn't be nearly as inconvenient. But I see your point. Like at the point where you have to construct it and you don't want to add a factory, having a property instead of a method is a lot easier to configure.
Yeah, and with the highlighted line, if the order by information is a nested type, the construction of the type is hidden, and you're now just talking about methods and properties off of it. So I think that would maintain usability across a variety of languages.
Sure. Yeah. I like 50 as well. The property.
Okay. So then we're basically going with the highlighted thing. I think if Adam, Wesley, everybody's kind of okay with this.
Yep.
Okay. Thanks for all your help on this, guys. All right, Adam, does this cover the questions that you had on the options, which you posted?
Yes. My main concern was that we have focused on the method names and we have just skipped the option bugs. Like it seems
the names of the bags, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So everything is clear now. Thank you.
Everybody's okay with the names of the bags, like get filtered out record options?
Seems fine.
Okay. All right, so that's good. We're making very good progress. We've got another half hour. I'll now jump to another area. We're basically done with the main things. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, can I just, I was reading the name. This is this is the filtered record options used for the get async method, right?
The get async variant that filters, yes.
My only complaint with the name is it sounds like I'm getting filtered, like I'm.
Yeah, but
it sounds like a method name.
Yeah.
You mean that the option bag shouldn't start with a verb, basically?
Yeah,
right?
so like filter, maybe just reorder it like filtered record get options or something like that.
And then record get options for this one.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't love that either, but I'm.
This feels like a very general naming problem. Like wherever you have an option bag for a method, we have this problem, right?
Where the method is a verb, which is very common.
Yeah, I was gonna say methods are supposed to be verbs.
Exactly.
Record retrieval options, but yeah, I get wanting to reuse the method name.
Yeah. So I mean, BCL doesn't have option bags really, so we don't. So I don't have a pattern embedded in my head. Stefan, what's extensions generally do here?
Generally, our options are tied to the type rather than the method, so this doesn't come up like a ton. I mean, EF Core does a lot of like extension methods and options to for things, and I mean maybe not as much as ASP.NET Core, but I don't know if there's a pattern for naming options after verby method names.
Have we had to do this for HTTP client, Steve? Do we have like a post options and a get options and a etc.?
We have some options, but I don't think they're tied to methods like that. I think they're more. I'd have to go look.
The type, right? That's like message configuration, HTTP message.
Where do we take those? Yeah, like HTTP request options.
Right. So you're back to object configuration instead of method parameters.
I mean, we could have the conversation of whether this should exist as option bags. I think both me and Wesley feel like it's a good match for option bags.
I think the options bag fine. I'm just trying to figure out if there's a better name, and if not, we can just keep these names.
Retrieval isn't maybe that bad.
So record retrieval options and filtered record retrieval options.
And this is directly on get record. Sorry, if we scroll left, this is.
Yeah.
And so I think record retrieval options is probably fine. Like,
does search have a similar set of options?
Search also has. It's a bit simpler, I think. It's called search options, vector search options, even.
Yeah, so there it's not search vector options; it's vector search options.
I see. The verb comes later.
Yeah, so
because it got
record retrieval options, I think is fine.
Or record get options, if you're trying
to
match.
Yeah.
Okay. That does seem like stilted, but I mean it's.
Yeah, I mean it is a little weird because it's saying get record has an options called record get.
And I had it in my head from what you'd said, Shai, that search and get were basically the same, but one was ordered and one was not. But it seems like that can't be the full extent of it then, because if these are different options, then there's different capabilities.
Yeah, there's definitely more here in the sense that, so when you're doing a search, you can pass in a filter, but you don't have to. Ignore the obsolete crap here, but you've got, for example, this thing, which is an optional filter that you can give, whereas in the filtering get, it's a mandatory parameter, so it's not in the options bag. You can also specify which vector property you actually want to search by. So the thing you're giving inside that embedding, there might be many multiple ones, so you have to give that. So yes, there's definitely stuff here.
So should there be an inheritance relationship between search and get, like vector search options derives from the get one and adds more stuff?
So we've asked ourselves that question. We always came down to, would there be a lot of value, and maybe we can even just do it later without breaking, just introduce a base class if needed, like later, because that wouldn't be a breaking change. Like we didn't really find a persuasive case. There's potential for base classes here, yes.
Okay.
But I am seeing now that another slight inconsistency is that this is a vector search options, whereas the other is a record retrieval. Although both retrieve records, it's just that this one does so by the vector. Like maybe this should also be a record search options as opposed to a vector search options. I don't know. Maybe it's not that important.
You're searching for records.
Yes.
And it's just a question of what the input is.
Exactly.
Does the vector as input show up anywhere in this type? No, right?
This type
property.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this you tell it which which property is the one to search over, for example.
I see.
While people are thinking about that, is there a reason you went with init instead of set?
Sorry?
Everything here is marked get init instead of get set. Is there a reason you care about init versus set?
Wesley, maybe you have an answer to this. I don't have one.
Yeah, it's mostly just to stop people from, stop people from changing it after calling the method and before it's finished. But it's probably unlikely that will happen.
I will say, especially if none of these are required, init is really annoying, particularly if you ever do want to pass this through like a callback for configuration. Not saying that's the scenario, but like I don't know. And I guess you could make an init set later, so that's another thing to consider. But I generally like defaulting to set for options for like non-required options.
Yeah, we've got the same question, Wesley, on the record definition objects, but let's leave that aside for now.
Yeah, unless we really care about the immutability of these things, I would also be a fan of get set. Just because it makes it easier. Init forces a certain pattern of construction. Get set allows more flexibility. And so we're giving up something by using init, and are we gaining enough in return? So that's really the
because it could be and probably will be effectively immutable, but now people can write like normal if statements to set a property and so forth without having to do like fancy expressions. And I don't know.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Because yes, you get I want the same options as before, but I want to skip, like I want to increment skip by the number of things that I received. And it's like, nope, you get to say new and copy every property over and hope that you didn't miss any. Hope that no new ones are added later. And
I will say though, the careful thing there, like you do have to be careful if you are creating multiple options instances. Is like if you are using the setability of an options type, you shouldn't assume that it's being cloned. Like by the time you pass your options to the thing, you should probably stop modifying it. And that is the benefit of init, is it enforces that. But
yeah, I mean, you shouldn't modify it while the awaitable is still running, but
fair.
Having an options, calling search or get or whatever, and then bumping up the skip count and going again, that feels natural to me.
I agree.
Same here. Yeah. Could also do a record and then you have with, but yeah, we're also.
But do you want all the rest of the stuff record gives you?
Right.
Yeah. Probably not relevant. Okay, I'm making a note to consider setters.
And have you noodled on the name enough now, Steve? Did I give you enough delay?
I was too focused on what we were talking about.
Oh, sorry.
This ended up just being a distraction.
I don't have a great suggestion other than it would be nice if these were consistent. So you get I think it's, I don't know. If no one else objects to what's currently there, I'm fine with it.
I agree it feels not great, but I don't have better answers.
So we are also supporting .NET Standard 2.0 and hoping to get some full framework users. Would using init cause any trouble to any of them?
So this is being recorded, right?
And broadcast.
Technically, theoretically, or legally, I don't know. Init is part of a version of C# that is technically, by documentation, not supported. In practice, it works just fine. You just need to make sure the right attributes are included in your compilation unit.
But if they're not, like a user doesn't have to care about that. We have to care about that, right?
Right.
It just becomes a set if they're not, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and init is set. The compiler for C# will stop you from assigning it outside of the object initializer, but reflection sees it as a set, so it doesn't mean immutable. It means the compiler suggests it's immutable.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so that doesn't sound like a reason to not do init, but personally, I'm not sure we have a persuasive reason.
We use init. We use init sparingly in various official core libraries like system.text.json. But we only use it when it's really important, and I don't think it is here.
Okay. Understood. Yeah. Okay. Nothing more about the name, right? We've basically kind of centered on maybe moving the get forwards and like retrieval get options, or record get options or record retrieval options maybe. And in any case, be consistent with the search variant of it, vector search options.
Yeah, maybe just noodle on it offline and send an email with what you decide to do.
And similar with the hybrid search options, since that's on the screen right now and I'm thinking about it.
I have one more question. The get record options, it has a single property and two constructors. Do we really need the copy constructor here?
Right, there's the question. So if we make this mutable, like if we remove the init, then maybe it's less important to have a copy constructor. But I know, Wesley, we discussed this at some point.
Yeah, I think if we make it mutable, then the copy constructor isn't that useful.
Right. I also see where we. Yeah.
Do all the options back? So I didn't see them on other ones.
Yeah, it might be. Is that actually public? It is. Yeah. Could be that we just never got around to adding it to the new ones, as this was one of the first. But yeah, I think we can probably remove it if we make it mutable.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, they are still occasionally useful. Again, it goes back to if you add new options in the future, if somebody else has made their own clone, they're now going to miss an option. We don't generally add them. We only add them when there's a reason that we feel that they're needed. But it is a thing to think about, but definitely be consistent.
Yeah. It's easy to add later as well, of course. And I think, I think it is, if somebody wants to do a lot of requests in parallel, then being able to clone these, and they do want to clone it and modify something small on it, then, it is a useful thing to have, I suppose. But yeah, if they can also construct a new one each time, and it should be fine. Just setting all of the options, from scratch and in the loop,
Okay, so I guess we're going in the direction of mutable, no copy constructors for all of these things. Okay. That actually covers everything I had on my list. That doesn't mean we've looked at all of the APIs here. We do have 15 minutes more, and I would like to show a couple more things, but the open questions I had in my mind are pretty much answered, which is super nice. I'm very happy about that. I do want to show, we may have not done a thing like this before, but there's also a namespace called connector support, at least currently. And the point of this is what we've seen so far is user-facing APIs. These are the important ones, obviously. They're public. We shouldn't break them, et cetera, et cetera. But implementations of connectors also need quite a bit of infrastructure. This is where MEVD is a little bit more like EF, in the sense that it's a bit more like a framework rather than just a set of abstractions. It's somewhere in between. It's obviously not as huge or complicated as EF. But for example, there's various Like at some point, I basically introduced something called a model, which basically represents the view of a connector over what is a record. So the number, which properties it has, all kinds of metadata about the vector and about the record. There's a model builder for building such a thing, and so on and so forth. And these are, we can call these helpers or utility classes for connector implementations, which they can use, and which also enforce certain behaviors across the board, across connectors. That also, Jeremy, relates to your point before about how do you enforce basically behavior around these things. So there's conformance tests, but there's also some chunks of stuff we don't want to duplicate around connectors, and so they're refactored here. This entire namespace is marked with experimental. All the types inside are experimental. This is very much unbaked, so we know that I basically did this during the last 3 months as I was doing the work. We know that we need to mature this and at some point make this non-experimental, but these are only connector-facing APIs. They're not public-facing at all. So we're kind of keeping the option of doing whatever we want with them, especially since we own almost all of the connectors here.
Even with an experimental, I'd love to come up with a different namespace name.
Sure.
Connector as a term, I know it's something that SK has used. It was foreign to me when I first encountered it in SK, and I had to learn what it meant. And really what it is just implementation of the abstractions. And giving a name like connector to that feels very foreign from a .NET perspective. So I'd like to avoid it in the namespace name.
So one problem with your suggestion is that the NuGet packages are currently called that. That's a name that.
They also include semantic kernel in them.
They do, indeed, they do. Yeah, I mean that's a different question of where these are, where these end up in the end at some point and so on. But so are you saying you would like us to change to basically remove the word connector and call it like across the board and call it something else?
I would like us to, from Microsoft Extension's vector data, I don't think connectors should show up anywhere.
I see. So at the very least, an MEVD rather than
that's not a statement about implementations can do whatever they want in their naming, and that's a separate conversation for what we want to do in our naming. But for the core library, I don't think the word connector should show up in the public service area.
Okay. Any other, should we just call this support or any ideas? This. Infrastructure.
So from the perspective of namespaces under runtime, where we have, I think it's runtime services and compiler services. It seems like services instead of support. And then what's the thing that they're servicing? This is vector stores?
The connectors or the implementations of the abstraction.
Right, but so this would be when you're implementing the vector store for a particular thing.
Yes.
So these are useful to someone implementing a vector store.
A vector store connector. Yes, exactly. A vector store in the .NET sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not like building a database.
Right. So I'm making the Jeremy vector store vector store.
Exactly.
Then I will have this using, but I should expose nothing out of my own API. So
Correct.
Then it's not a great name, but then that would be
services?
vector store services. So this is crap you call if you are the implementation of a vector store. Where by implementation I mean the .NET code talking to a backing system.
I quite like implementation support, because it's quite explicit and there's a lot. I mean, vector support can also refer to just, there's a lot of things that are vector store specific in the abstractions as well. But implementation support is quite specific, that it's for implementers.
Yeah, I mean, implementation and support those are two words that we never use. So.
One slight thing, naming aside, is that the plan is also at some point to have an analyzer where if you use anything from this namespace, you get a warning, and then implementations suppress that so that users don't accidentally do anything with it. I don't know if we have like similar cases in other places. In EF Core, we've got something called pubternal. We do public, but we have an internal sort of attribute, and we've got an analyzer for that, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. The concept of pubternal and definitely the word pubternal are banned. So.
Well, yeah.
You may have been what led to the ban. So.
Oh man, that happened in 3.0. We made all of the previously pubternal classes in ASP.NET Core. Yeah. Oh man, that was painful. Except for a few. There's like one or two types that are still in an internal namespace, but now they're fully public.
So I'll only say this: we really like it in EF, and we think it's been a success story. And like that compromise between stuff that users are really not encouraged to use, and they have no guarantees if they do, but it's an escape hatch and so on. But anyway, that's regardless.
Just really quick. Okay, but as a counterpoint, I'll say we've got a lot of compliments in ASP.NET Core since 3.0 that we stopped breaking people and they get less method messaging sessions and so forth. But depends on the scenario.
It's interesting that we don't get it like in EF Core. We actually really don't have it. Maybe I don't know. Maybe users actually don't need it, where for whatever reason, whereas they did need them in the ASP.NET. I don't know. Anyway, that's a different conversation. This one is really about implementation-facing APIs, which is also different. Like users really should never use these APIs. It's not about they're internal, but you can still use them as an escape hatch. They should never use these APIs, basically.
Well, consumers should never use them, but implementations.
Correct.
Less than 50 implementations that will exist should be
exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah.
We were discussing earlier names that are hostile to try and dissuade people from using it. I think vector store services sounds like something I would want to use if I was a consumer.
The one thing ASP.NET Core does do, and it kind of gets away with it because it can ship some things in the shared framework, not in a lot of places, but does do internals visible too, right? Since we don't have pubternal. But I guess these are actual third party. So you said like 50.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Like third-party partners implementing implementations for their own vector database are expected to use this. One thought that just came to mind, by the way, is that maybe we should split these out to a separate package even, and call it something else, whatever it is that we end up calling the namespace. We could also call the package. But we can always do that later as well. Again, everything here is experimental, so we're keeping the leeway. But I think we still maybe want to find a name that everybody's okay with.
I'd be fine with something like implementation services, implementation support, but whatever, it's experimental. I just, something scary sounding would be fine.
But realistically, right, like even if there are like only 50 implementations, and I get now that it's experimental, so that's one thing, right? But someday it will not be experimental, and it will still be like the second class API. Like, are we planning like to make it backwards compatible? Like, what's the migration story for those 50 packages if we do make it an API change or whatever it is?
So currently, literally all of them are owned by us, and we're making those changes. So we're breaking ourselves. That's completely fine. By the time, like before this starts hopefully before this starts like exploding and everybody is writing their implementations, of course, that's not relevant. We hope to stabilize this. So this is not supposed to stay experimental for years.
Got it.
Hopefully.
All right, so there is a plan to stabilize and not be pubternal or whatever it is. It will just be public API. Yeah.
It would be public, but very much not consumer facing. That's the point here.
Got it. Okay.
So in addition to services, it looks like we do also have precedent of things largely system.data and sub namespaces using utilities as a thing. I mean, I wouldn't want to call it just vector data.utilities, but vector store utilities is not terrible.
That kind of doesn't. The thing is that we want to avoid the name for connector, and therefore, like for what an implementation is called, and therefore we're leaving it very ambiguous that it's not meant for use by consumers, right? Like any name here, vector store services or utilities or implement, anything kind of leaves room for even implementation is like a super.
Provider.
Everybody's implementing something.
Provider utilities. provider
We can call them providers,
services.
but
that sounds fine to me.
Yeah, I like provider as well.
Provider services, utilities.
Either way.
Provider service. Okay. I'm going to note provider services, and potentially we have a NuGet package called Microsoft Extensions Vector Data Provider Services in the future that will hold all of this stuff. All right. I think we're at time. Again, there's still areas here that, you know, we could discuss and I could show, but I think we're kind of okay.
Can you quickly tell me about your metadata and exception types? I saw some types that literally had the word metadata and types that were new exception types. So.
Okay, so metadata is basically the thing. Here we're following MEAI patterns. This is a thing that you can get via get service, that get service method, and it contains stuff that you can know either about your vector store. Like this is going to tell you I'm Quadrant or Postgres or SQL Server, and this one is going to tell you what the name of the store is. Like that's the name of a database, for example, in SQL Server. It's basically introspection on that, and then the collection adds the collection name to that thing.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yep.
Yep.
As for exceptions, yeah, that part I think Wesley will be able to talk about a bit better, but in principle, anything that users may want to catch, for example, IO errors or things like this are wrapped inside a vector store exception. And if I remember correctly, so yeah, this is also in flux. They're wrapped inside a vector store operation exception, in fact, and we used to have also a mapping exception, which we are in the process of removing because it doesn't make sense anymore. So I'm not sure what. That's correct. Maybe we don't have any more meaningful story, but like distinguishing between these two exceptions. I don't know. Maybe we can collapse them.
What does vector store exception derive from? What kind of exception is that?
Vector store exception?
It just derives from exception. But we used to have two exceptions deriving from vector store exception, and now that the other one is gone, we probably don't need the base type anymore.
So collapse vector store operation exception into vector store exception?
And is this basically supposed to be an equivalent of invalid operation exception, or is this a more like cryptographic exception of something went wrong and I'm sorry I can't give you better information?
It usually wraps. Sorry, I'm going to let Wesley talk.
Yeah, it's really about when service calls failed that we would wrap this, and it's so that people who are using the abstraction know which exception type they need to handle, as opposed to needing to handle exception types from different database types, depending on which implementation they're using.
System data has DB exception, which is logically the same thing. It just wraps, it basically is something similar.
Okay, and Levi, what's your opinion this afternoon on whether or not things should be marked serializable if they expect to run on framework?
The guidance has been for the last several years, no more serialization info constructors, even for NetFX facing things.
Okay. Okay, I was trying to remember if our guideline was pro or anti make a exception for your library and wrap things in it, but I can understand what you're saying is you want a consistent answer across the Cosmos Mongo and Postgres and everything else. You're trying to help unify across the various implementations, things that aren't necessarily expressible with existing standard exceptions. So
exactly.
But does the base class expose anything other than the constructors? What does the base one look like? Okay, it does.
Okay, so you have context info on it.
Yeah.
And it's not the case that these are all, like, exception is the right base type. It's not the case that these are all IO related or invalid operation. We don't know what they are, so they're just grouped. Okay.
Right. As long as you're not using it for argument exception. I'm probably
Yeah, no. So anything like there's various other exceptions. For example, if you try to search and there's no embedding generator configured, you've basically made a mistake, right? That's an error, and that's not a vector store exception. That's just, I think, an invalid operation exception.
And we're not going to wrap operation canceled exceptions or anything like that in one of these, right?
No, we've discussed this before. Absolutely not.
Yeah, we're specifically. I'm actually doing a pass at the moment through everything to make sure we're only wrapping database specific exceptions, and it's really focusing on request failures to the database and anything else that might have gone wrong, specifically with the call, as opposed to it being a coding error or a parameter error or a failure that the user should be able to fix themselves if they've provided the wrong information to us.
Oh, if we're done on the exceptions, I know we're over time. I will just call the attention to we're actually exposing some public strings here. And the reason for this is that we want providers, implementations to throw specific exceptions with specific messages for specific error conditions. Therefore, we are exposing those strings here. We do this in EF quite a lot in general, and we test even in the in conformance test that the correct string is being thrown. This is not completely I don't know if we do this in any other place, and it's a bit tricky because if a provider, for example, will have to do string format over this, and it must assume that there's going to be 3 placeholders in there in case there are placeholders, and if we change the string, then that starts failing. So as a public API, this is a bit problematic. It's still completely provider facing though, rather than anything else. So I don't know if anybody has any thoughts.
Do you have conformance tests for the providers that you run that
yes.
test these things? Nice.
Yes.
And are these templated at all, or I guess it doesn't.
They are.
Yeah.
You mean in the sense that they have placeholders, right? And you put
they're positional.
Yeah.
Their position.
I mean, we've
been. It's done. Yeah.
We've been introducing more public throw helpers, and so if it's that you need to pass 3 pieces of data, then it might make sense if you just had it as the void throw, and you give it the 3 pieces of data that it needs for whatever kind of error it's being. That's a thing to consider. But I saw that you had some context init only parameters on your exception type, and those would be hard to set unless you took them as parameters to all the functions that could take them. So
do they need to be init only? We could just do more setters.
Exceptions with setters on them feel weird. I mean, I guess we do have them because HR is settable so that you can set one after you initialize the exception and you're the handler for it. So I guess it's true. Those could also be get set, and you could.
I personally don't see a problem with having the throw helpers accept those parameters, and that's it, and then just flow them into the constructor of the exception either.
Yeah, so it's a thing to consider.
So maybe replace these, make these internal and replace and expose a throw helper instead.
Yeah, because the stuff out of the
internal code would have to check.
Sorry?
So the external code would only have to throw. It's not catching the exceptions. Yeah.
No. Yeah. Only our conformance tests catch these and do something. Basically. Yeah. Throw helpers are fine.
Core BCL things, we don't expose the resource strings, but we do have exceptions that are being thrown in the same place for the same reasons. We added object disposed exception .throw if disposed. It takes the boolean, it does the test, and then it throws the exception for you.
Right.
So we have a lot of throw ifs. We have a couple just throws, and part of that is helping get normalized strings. Though we do have other reasons, but
yeah, I'll add something in provider services. I think we wanted to call it to just expose to just allow throwing things, and that's it. I think that's fine. All right. Thank you very much. I think we're done. Thanks again for everybody. This has been immensely helpful.
All right.
And I think we're pretty good.
Thank you,
Hey,
Shaq.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
And again, thanks everybody who joined us online. Definitely had some good questions and good suggestions. And there won't be the normal kind of notes published on this because we didn't do the notes in the normal way. But you can still track all the things from the issue in the .NET Runtime repository. And next week, on Tuesday, we'll be returning to our normal flow of going down the list on APIReview.net. And yeah, see you at our same .NET time on our same .NET channel. Till then, Auf Wiedersehen.